I turned 18 at exactly midnight. And by sunrise, my father was accusing me of stealing from the family. The strange part? I hadn't taken a single dollar. I had only protected what was already mine. And if I had waited even one more hour, everything my grandparents spent years building would have been gone. Sold. Destroyed. Erased. But to understand how it all came to this, you have to go back years earlier. Before the lawyers, before the betrayal, before I learned what greed can do to people who call themselves family. My name is Piper Langston, and for most of my life, I believed blood meant loyalty. I believed family protected one another. I believed love was unconditional. I was wrong. I grew up in a small town outside Asheville, North Carolina. The kind of place where front porches still mattered and neighbors waved when they drove by. From the outside, my family looked like the American dream. My father, Daniel Langston, owned a successful construction supply company. My mother, Teresa, volunteered at church and hosted holiday dinners that made everyone think she was kindness in human form. And then there was my younger sister, Brooke. Bright, charming, effortlessly adored. The golden child. The center of every room. The one my parents celebrated for simply existing. And me? I was the dependable one. The quiet daughter. The one who got straight A's, helped with chores, and never caused trouble. I was useful. And in my family, being useful was not the same as being loved. I didn't fully understand that as a child. I only felt it. In the way my father praised Brooke for average grades while my achievements were met with silence. In the way my mother bought her designer clothes while telling me to be grateful for hand-me-downs. In the way every family photo seemed to revolve around her smile while I stood slightly out of frame. I spent years trying to earn affection that should have come naturally. But the one place I never felt invisible was Cedar Hollow, our family's lake cabin. A weathered cedar home tucked beside a quiet private lake, surrounded by tall pines and wildflowers. To everyone else, it was old property. To me, it was sanctuary. My grandparents, Walter and Evelyn Langston, lived there year-round. And every summer, I stayed with them for weeks. At Cedar Hollow, I wasn't compared. I wasn't ignored. I was simply loved. My grandfather taught me practical things. How to repair loose boards. How to patch a roof. How to split firewood without wasting energy. He believed in teaching through doing. Take care of what matters, he'd always say. Because if you don't, someone else will decide it's worth for you. At 12 years old, I thought he was only talking about property. I would later realize he meant much more. My grandmother was softer, but just as wise. She made cinnamon tea every evening and told stories on the porch as the sun dipped behind the lake. She said home wasn't a building. It was the people who protected your peace. Looking back now, I realized they were preparing me, because they saw what I couldn't. They saw the cracks in my family long before they shattered. One autumn evening, my grandfather and I were repairing the fence near the dock. The sky was turning orange, the air crisp with the scent of pine. Without looking at me, he said, "People show you who they are when money enters the room." I laughed. I thought it was just another life lesson. But he turned to me serious. "Remember that, Piper, because one day it will matter." I promised I would. At the time, I had no idea that sentence would define my future. 2 years later, my grandfather passed away suddenly. Heart failure. No warning. One day he was fixing a railing. The next he was gone. At his funeral, I was devastated. But grief sharpens awareness. And I noticed things. like how my father and his younger brother, Victor, stood apart from everyone else, whispering in low voices. Victor had documents in his hand, and I heard one sentence I never forgot. "We need to move before complications start." At 14, I didn't understand, but I remembered, because something about it felt wrong. My grandmother carried on alone at the cabin. I visited every chance I could. She seemed smaller without him, but still steady, still warm, still strong. Then 2 years later she passed too, and that was when everything changed. Hours after her funeral, while I was still numb with grief, my father sat at the dinner table and casually said, "We should sell the cabin before it becomes a burden." I stared at him. Sell it? Grandma had been gone less than a day, and already he was reducing her life to a financial inconvenience. Victor agreed immediately. "There's a developer interested in lakeside properties." That was the first time I truly saw them, not as grieving sons, but as businessmen calculating profit. And suddenly, my grandfather's warning came rushing back. People show you who they are when money enters the room. I spent that night awake, replaying every conversation, every glance, every detail. And for the first time in my life, I understood that the people I trusted most might not deserve that trust at all. I didn't know it then, but that was the beginning of the war over Cedar Hollow, and I was standing right in the center of it. After that dinner, the atmosphere in our house changed. No one spoke about grief anymore. No one mentioned my grandmother's stories, her tea, or the porch where she spent every evening watching the sunset. Instead, every conversation somehow circled back to Cedar Hollow. The cabin became the property. The lakefront became premium acreage. And the memories I cherished became numbers on paper. It was like my grandparents' entire legacy had been stripped of emotion and repackaged as a business opportunity. I hated it, but more than that, I feared it, because I could see how serious they were. My father started taking phone calls behind closed doors. Victor came over more often, carrying folders and legal forms. They'd lower their voices when I entered a room, and every time I asked questions, I got the same answer. "Adult matters, Piper." That phrase became a wall. A way to shut me out. A way to make me feel small. But I wasn't a child anymore. And I was paying attention. I began spending every weekend at Cedar Hollow. At first, I told myself it was to preserve the place, to keep it maintained, to hold on to the last pieces of my grandparents. But deep down, I think I was guarding it, protecting it from becoming another casualty of greed. I repaired shutters, repainted the porch railing, cleaned out storage rooms that hadn't been touched in years. The cabin felt alive when I worked on it. Like every nail I hammered kept their memory intact. One Saturday afternoon, while cleaning the upstairs hallway closet, I found something unexpected. Tucked behind folded quilts was a cream-colored envelope. My name was written across the front in my grandmother's handwriting. For a second, I couldn't breathe. I sat on the floor and opened it carefully. Inside was a business card. Nothing else. Just one name. Evelyn Mercer, estate attorney. On the back in blue ink were 7 words. "When the time comes, trust her." That was it. No explanation. No details. No letter. Just those words. I read them over and over. 100 questions filled my mind. Why would Grandma leave this for me? What did she know? And what exactly was the time? I considered calling right then. But fear has a way of delaying action. I wasn't ready for answers I didn't understand, so I tucked the card into my wallet and told no one. Weeks passed, then months, and the pressure around the cabin intensified. One evening, I came home to hear my father laughing in the kitchen. He was on speakerphone with Victor. The developer is willing to go as high as $480 if we move fast. $480,000. For Cedar Hollow. I stood frozen in the hallway. That number hit me like a physical blow. Because to them it was profit. To me, it was the price of erasing my grandparents forever. I stepped into the kitchen. You're already negotiating? My father's smile disappeared instantly. This doesn't concern you. It concerns me if you're selling my grandparents' home. Victor's voice crackled through the phone. Sentiment doesn't pay taxes, sweetheart. I clenched my fists. It's not just property. My father sighed like I was inconveniencing him. It's a burden, and we're doing what's practical. Practical. That word again. As if practicality excused betrayal. As if money justified everything. I walked out before I said something I'd regret. But that night, I finally called Evelyn Mercer. Her office was downtown, tucked between a bookstore and a tax firm. She answered on the second ring. The moment I said my name, her tone changed. Piper, I've been waiting for your call. My heart skipped. Waiting? We scheduled a meeting for the following afternoon. I barely slept. When I arrived, she greeted me warmly and led me into a private office lined with legal books. She closed the door and sat across from me. Then she opened a thick file with my family's name on it. What she said next changed my life. Your grandparents established an irrevocable trust 6 years ago. Eighteenth heir. A trust? She nodded. The lake cabin, several investment accounts, and additional assets were transferred into it. I struggled to process her words. Transferred to who? She looked directly at me. To you. For a moment, I thought I misheard. But she repeated it. I was the sole beneficiary. Everything legally belonged to me upon my 18th birthday. The cabin. The accounts. All of it. Protected. Locked. Untouchable by probate. Untouchable by family claims. I sat there in stunned silence. My grandparents had planned this years ago. They had anticipated conflict. And they had chosen me. Then Evelyn said something that made my blood run cold. Your father and uncle have already made inquiries about ownership transfer. I looked up sharply. What does that mean? It means they are attempting to act as if the property belongs to the family estate. But it doesn't. No, it does not. I felt anger rise in my chest. So they're trying to sell something they don't own? She gave me a grim look. That appears to be the case. That was the moment everything shifted. This was no longer family disagreement. This was fraud. And suddenly, every secretive meeting, every whispered call, every legal form made sense. They weren't grieving. They were scheming. And they were moving fast. Evelyn leaned forward. When you turn 18, the trust activates fully. At that point, you can assume direct legal control. How long until then? She checked the file. 3 months. 3 months. It felt both close and impossibly far. What do I do until then? Be careful. Say nothing. And watch closely. I left her office with my entire world rearranged. The people I had spent my life trying to please were preparing to steal from me. And the only reason they hadn't succeeded yet was because they didn't know the truth. I understood then why my grandmother had written those words. When the time comes, trust her. The time had come, and I was officially at war. What I didn't know was how far my father and uncle were willing to go, because the closer my birthday came, the more desperate they became. And desperation makes dangerous people reckless. The final 3 months before my 18th birthday were the longest of my life. I lived in a house full of people who smiled at me over dinner, while quietly planning to erase me from my own inheritance. And the worst part? They had no idea I knew. That gave me one advantage: silence. So I stayed quiet. I observed. I listened. And I collected every detail. Because if I was going to protect what my grandparents left me, I needed proof. And proof started appearing faster than I expected. About 6 weeks before my birthday, I came home early from school and heard voices in the garage. My father and Victor were inside. The side door was cracked open. I froze when I heard the word signatures. Victor sounded impatient. The buyer wants everything finalized before the quarter ends. My father replied, "We can file once she turns 18. If paperwork needs adjusting, we'll handle it." Adjusting? Victor scoffed. You mean forging? A cold wave passed through me. Forging? I stepped closer. My father lowered his voice. She doesn't know anything. We'll give her 50 grand and tell her it's generosity. Victor laughed. She should be grateful. I stood there in complete disbelief. They were talking about me, as if I were an obstacle, a problem to manage, a child to manipulate. Not family, not blood, not someone they claimed to love. That moment shattered something inside me, because hearing betrayal directly is different than suspecting it. It leaves no room for excuses, no room for denial. I left before they saw me, but I recorded part of the conversation on my phone. That night, I sent the audio to Evelyn. Her response came within minutes. Keep everything. Do not confront them. The next day, she requested copies of every suspicious document I could access. And that's when I became something I never imagined: an investigator inside my own home. I photographed contracts left on kitchen counters. I scanned envelopes addressed to developers. I copied meeting schedules from my father's desk calendar. Every piece mattered. And with every discovery, the picture became clearer. They had already signed a preliminary sales agreement, $480,000, to a private development company planning to demolish Cedar Hollow and build luxury lake houses. Demolish. That word hit hardest. They weren't just selling it. They intended to destroy it. Everything my grandparents built. Every board my grandfather repaired. Every story my grandmother told on that porch. Gone. Replaced with profit. I cried that night in my room. Not from fear. From grief. Because I understood then that greed doesn't only steal money. It steals memory. And they were willing to erase generations for a check. 2 weeks before my birthday, the pressure escalated. My father suddenly became nicer. Too nice. He asked about school, offered to take me to dinner, even complimented my college essays. It felt unnatural, like watching someone rehearse kindness. Then one evening, he sat me down in the living room. "Piper, we've been discussing your future." I stayed quiet. He folded his hands. "You're becoming an adult. That means responsibility." I nodded slowly. He continued, We've decided to set aside $50,000 for you." There it was. The hush money. He said it like he was giving me a gift. I forced a neutral expression. "That's generous." "It's family helping family." I almost laughed. Instead I asked, "What's the catch?" His jaw tightened. "No catch. Just appreciation." Liar. But I smiled. "Thank you." For the first time in my life, I understood strategy. And sometimes strategy means letting people believe you're naive, because arrogance blinds them. And their arrogance was about to cost them everything. 3 days before my birthday, Evelyn called me. Her tone was urgent. "They've scheduled the transfer filing for the morning after your birthday." I gripped the phone tighter. "So they're going through with it?" "Yes. Which means we move first." She explained the process. At midnight on my birthday, the trust would activate. I needed to sign the final legal acknowledgement immediately. Then by morning, she would file ownership confirmation with the county. If we delayed even hours, complications could arise. I agreed. That night, I packed a small bag and told my parents I was staying with a friend. Instead, I drove to Cedar Hollow. I unlocked the cabin just after sunset. The moment I stepped inside, I felt peace. Like the house itself knew why I had come. I lit the fireplace and sat on the porch with my grandmother's old blanket wrapped around me. For hours, I watched the lake ripple under moonlight. And I thought about everything that had led me there. The warnings, the secrets, the betrayal, the love my grandparents had hidden in legal protection. At 11:57 p.m., Evelyn arrived with a folder. She placed it on the kitchen table. At exactly midnight, I turned 18, and I signed. Every page, every clause, every acknowledgement of ownership. The moment my signature dried, everything changed. Legally, Cedar Hollow was secured, protected. Meaning, Evelyn filed the paperwork electronically before sunrise. By 8 a.m., official notice was entered into county records. At 9:05 a.m., my father and Victor walked into the county office carrying forged transfer documents. And that was when their world collapsed. Because the clerk rejected everything instantly. The property was already under active trust ownership. No estate rights existed. No authority remained. No transfer possible. Their claim was dead before it began. And within minutes, my phone started ringing. Over and over. Calls from my father. Calls from Victor. Voicemails filled with anger, panic, and disbelief. But I didn't answer. Because for the first time in my life, I held the power. And they knew it. What happened next was bigger than any of us expected. Because their failed sale triggered consequences far beyond family drama. And by sunset, their entire scheme would be exposed. By noon that same day, everything had spiraled beyond their control. The developer they had promised Cedar Hollow to was furious. Apparently, contracts had already been drafted, investors had been informed, and demolition planning had quietly begun. The moment the sale collapsed, legal threats followed. And since Victor had signed documents claiming authority he did not have, the company came after him first. Fraud, misrepresentation, breach of contract. Words that had once been whispered in hidden meetings were now printed in official filings. And those words hit like a storm. I was still at Cedar Hollow when Evelyn called. Her voice was calm, but I could hear the satisfaction beneath it. It's unraveling exactly as expected. I stood on the porch, staring out at the lake. For the first time in months, I could breathe. "What happens now?" "Now," she said, "they face the consequences of pretending they owned what was never theirs." An hour later, my father arrived at the cabin. Alone. I saw his truck pull into the gravel driveway, tires crunching slowly, like he was unsure whether he should even be there. For a moment, I considered not opening the door. But I did, because some endings require confrontation. He stepped inside, looking older than he had just yesterday. His shoulders were tense, his face pale, and for the first time in my life he looked uncertain. "Piper." That was all he said. No angit, no authority, just my name. I crossed my arms. "You shouldn't be here." His jaw tightened. "This has gone too far." I almost laughed. "Too far? You tried to steal from me." "We were protecting the family." "No," I said sharply. "You were protecting your bank account." That hit him. I saw it. Because truth lands differently when there's no lie left to hide behind. He exhaled heavily. "You don't understand the pressure I was under." I stared at him. For years, I had wanted explanations. Now they sounded hollow. "Then explain it." He looked away toward the fireplace. The business was failing. Debt was piling up. Investors were pulling out. I needed capital. I felt no sympathy, only clarity. "So you sold your parents' legacy to save yourself." I thought it was the practical choice. That word again. Practical. As if morality could be reduced to spreadsheets. I stepped closer. "You had choices. You could have asked for help. You could have told the truth. Instead, you forged documents and planned to bribe me into silence." He flinched. That told me everything. Then he asked the question I think had been haunting him all day. "Why would they choose you over me?" The room went still, and I answered with the only truth that mattered. "Because I loved what they built. You only wanted to sell it." Silence. Heavy and undeniable. He had no response. Because deep down he already knew. That was the difference between us. I saw home. He saw inventory. And that distinction cost him everything. He left without another word. I watched his truck disappear down the road. And I knew I'd never see him the same way again. But the story didn't end there. Because karma rarely stops at one lesson. By evening, Victor's legal troubles exploded publicly. The development company filed suit. The county launched an investigation into the forged transfer documents. And when authorities reviewed his licensing history, they found irregularities tied to prior transactions. Old complaints resurfaced. Questionable deals were reopened. Within weeks, his real estate license was suspended indefinitely. His reputation collapsed overnight. And without his license, his business crumbled. As for my father, the financial problems he had hidden finally came to light. His construction company had been operating on borrowed time for years. When word spread about the failed cabin deal, lenders lost confidence. Credit lines were frozen. Contracts were canceled. Within months, the company filed for bankruptcy. Everything he tried to protect through greed disappeared anyway. That's the irony of selfish choices. They often create the very loss they were meant to avoid. My mother called me several times during those weeks. At first she cried. Then she blamed me. Then she begged. But eventually, even she stopped pretending innocence. One evening, she admitted quietly, "I knew what they were doing." That confession hurt more than I expected. because betrayal from silence is still betrayal, and her choice to stand by them instead of stopping them told me exactly where I stood. I forgave her in time, but forgiveness doesn't mean access, and it certainly doesn't erase accountability. 2 months later, I moved into Cedar Hollow permanently. I enrolled in college nearby and used the education fund my grandparents had secretly established for me. Another surprise. Another act of love I never saw coming. The cabin became my home in every sense. I restored the porch, rebuilt the dock, repainted the shutters, and slowly, I turned grief into renewal. For the first time in my life, I built a future that belonged entirely to me, one rooted in truth instead of approval. Years have passed since then. My relationship with my parents remains distant, civil but limited, because boundaries are not punishment, they are protection. And some relationships can only survive at a distance. As for Cedar Hollow, it still stands, exactly where it always has, strong against the water, quiet beneath the pines, a reminder that legacy isn't about what you inherit, it's about what you preserve. And every sunset on that porch feels like a conversation with the people who believed in me before I even believed in myself. If there's one thing this story taught me, it's this. Never confuse family with entitlement. Love is not ownership. Blood is not permission. And loyalty should never require sacrificing your dignity. The people who truly care for you will protect your peace, not exploit your trust. My grandparents understood that. And because they did, they gave me far more than property. They gave me wisdom. They gave me strength. And they gave me the courage to stand firm when everything around me tried to break me. That was my real inheritance. Not the cabin, not the money, but the lesson. Because in the end, truth always rises. Greed always reveals itself. And justice, real justice, comes when you refuse to surrender what is rightfully yours. If this story meant something to you, share your thoughts in the comments. Have you ever seen family torn apart by money? And if you believe in standing your ground no matter who stands against you, make sure to subscribe. Because some stories aren't just entertainment. They're reminders of what really matters.